Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What are the United Nations and the various countries of the world doing to combat climate change? What is one country, namely Ecuador, doing to preserve a pristine rainforest? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Climate change and the loss of rainforests are major problems affecting people all around the world. Today we're going to look at a project in Ecuador that's helping to reverse that trend and see what can be done to preserve pristine rainforests as well as to reduce that carbon footprint. My guest is an expert in this area. My guest today is Dr. Bisrat Aklilu. Dr. Aklilu has been the executive coordinator of the Multi-Partner Trust Fund in the Office of the United Nations Development Program since 2004. Previously, Dr. Aklilu enjoyed a long career with the UN operations where he was Deputy Executive Director and Director of Operations from 1996 until 2004. In his earlier years, Dr. Aklilu focused on Africa and the Middle East with the International Fund for Agricultural Development. Dr. Aklilu, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me. We're going to jump into this project, the Yasuni ITT initiative, which is very important, but just give us a brief overview of the agency you work with, the UN Development Program.
The United Nations Development Program is the global development network that connects countries to experience, to knowledge, and also to resource so that they can better the lives of their own citizens. It's an organization that is represented in 177 countries and works on 4 specific areas: poverty reduction, economic governance, and prevention of crisis prevention. And the 4th one, which is related to Yasuni, which is energy and sustainable development.
That's an excellent segue right into the Yasuni initiative, the Yasuni ITT initiative. What exactly is that? When was it started? Why was it started?
Well, this is a very, very exciting initiative. In fact, it's much more than a project because it's a national initiative. In 1979, they created the national park in Yasuni. In 1989, the UNESCO designated it as a World Biosphere Preserve in recognition of really the huge diversity, both ecological, biological, and also even in terms of people, diversity that it has. And in 2007, the president of Ecuador, President Correa, came to the United Nations and indicated that despite the fact that they had discovered a huge reserve of oil underneath this unique biodiverse area, they have decided to forego the extraction in order to preserve it and also to really avoid the climate, the emission that would result from the exploitation of oil, as long as there is a partnership between Ecuador and the international community. So it's the first time that a country voluntarily decides to forego huge resource in favor of sustainable development, renewable energy, and to change also the development pattern itself.
Now, you put together a very interesting video, and what we're going to do is watch a bit of the video now, and then we'll watch the rest of it a little bit later in the program. But let's go to the video, and then we'll come back and discuss it.
Thank you.
The Yasuni National Park, located in the Ecuadorian Amazon rainforest, is an exceptionally unique biodiversity refuge. 1 hectare in Yasuni contains more species of trees and bushes than all of North America. Two isolated indigenous tribes, the Tagaeri and Taromenane, inhabit, together with the Waurani, the Yasuni National Park. Yasuni ITT, an initiative to change history. Ecuador has proposed to the world an innovative plan in order to confront the challenge posed by climate change to the future of mankind. Ecuador proposes to leave beneath the Yasuni National Park the 846 million barrels of oil that are within the ITT block. By doing so, the emission into the atmosphere of 407 million metric tons of carbon that would have been released by the burning of those fossil fuels are avoided. In exchange, Ecuador requests that the international community assume its co-responsibility by contributing no less than half of the revenues that would be received by selling these oil reserves. Direct benefits of this initiative. The non-emission into the atmosphere of 407 million tons of CO2 and the guaranteed non-exploitation of these petroleum reserves. The conservation of the immense biological richness within the Yasuni National Park, declared by UNESCO as a biosphere reserve, along with the conservation of 39 additional national parks, adding up to the most biologically diverse reserve on the planet. Respect for the cultures of the indigenous tribes who live in isolation within the boundaries of the Yasuni National Park. Reforestation of 1 million hectares. A decisive impulse to the country's transition from an extractive economy based on petroleum exploitation towards a more sustainable development model with broad use of renewable energy sources, respect for biodiversity, and increased social equity.
Dr. Aklilu, that seems like a very interesting project, and one that I've not heard too much about, not only in Ecuador, but also around the world. Seems like it was also a very bold idea to leave this pristine rainforest, especially with the increased demand for oil. And I think there were over 800 million plus barrels of oil under the ground, and not to mention the variety of other resources, I'm sure. But it seems like it was a very bold initiative because we see that more and more nations need oil. The economic engines are starting to gear up again. The population is increasing. But would you say it's a bold initiative to undertake it?
I think you really used the right word. I mean, incredibly bold initiative. A very historic also decision on the part of the Ecuadorians. For a very small country, a country that faces poverty. About 30% of the Ecuadorian population lives under the poverty. And at this time, to forego an estimated about 7.2 billion in resource, in income that they would have got if they had extracted this oil. Actually, this 7.2 billion is estimated at 2007 price. Probably it's more like 12 billion. Is indeed an incredibly bold decision. But what is admirable is the people themselves. 80% of the Ecuadorians, in a referendum voted that no, it should not be exploited. It should be kept underneath, So indeed, it's really a great decision.
So they had a democratic election on this, put it on a referendum, and
they put it on
they decided to do this.
Absolutely.
Right. But now, Ecuador is an oil exporting country, though. As I recall, it's probably one of the major exporting countries, is it not?
I mean, this is one of the issues that actually quite often raised, It's not, Ecuador is not against the extraction of oil. It is extracting, it is exporting oil. And as you said, it's a member of the OPEC countries as well. But it's saying that, in an area where it is so, diverse, biologically kind of diverse, where the benefits of keeping it in terms of for humanity, not just for the Ecuadorians, by far outweighs the short-term benefit that they would have gotten. They took this, historical decision. So it's only in a question of, in our area of mega biodiversity, when you have this conflict of oil or any other natural, resource extraction that will conflict with preservation of, and also the indigenous people that are living there. It's a respect for the livelihood and the culture of the indigenous people. So this is what really makes this a very, very unique initiative.
Well, it certainly is. And if our viewers would like more information on this, they can go to mptf.org. www.undp.org, and get much more information and be brought up to date on what's going on, not only with this initiative, but with other programs and projects that you have that are underway. This, as I mentioned earlier, the demand is increasing for oil, coal to some degree.
Right.
These are obviously they're resources that are not infinite. They're finite resources, but they're also polluting types of energy, and so that is a problem. But I would imagine there's tremendous demand to try to get to that oil. Is this actually written into the Ecuadorian law? Will this apply 10 years from now, 20 years from now that the program is in the biosphere program? You mentioned UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. So is this guaranteed for 50, 20, or 50, 100, 200 years?
Actually, it's an indefinite, guarantee. What is happening is, under this initiative, when the United Nations Development Program and the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office came in to administer the fund, that was at the request of the government. What the government has decided is, for any contributor that is making a contribution to this fund, they will get what is known as a Yasuni guarantee certificate. It's a guarantee that should any future government even decide to exploit, to extract oil, the government will return the entire amount that has been contributed. And this has been put in the national indebtedness law. So it's what they call a contingency debt. So this contribution, as long as, of course, Ecuador refrains from extraction, it becomes a grant. But should there be any decision in the future, it will be returned. So it's an indefinite, it's not for 20 years, it's not for 30 years, it's an indefinite decision.
And now the Multi-Partner Trust Fund, the one that you operate in the UN Development Program, what exactly, are you the administrator, so to speak, of that? Is that how that works?
Yeah, I'm called the executive coordinator.
The executive
coordinator of that. It's an office that administers, similar kinds of contributions that are raised for humanitarian transition, for development, for climate change. For example, RED, the UN RED, it's called, And the hallmark of really our service is transparency. We make sure that whatever resources contributed by governments, certainly from the taxpayers, including individuals like Yasuni, is absolutely publicly disclosed. Within 2 hours of the action taken, contribution coming, you can see it publicly. When the money is spent, what it's spent for, how it's used, all that is publicly kind of disclosed. And this is one of the reasons why Ecuador asked us to actually administer it, because of the transparency.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'll be back in just a moment after this important message. Welcome back to our program. Today we're looking at the Yasuni ITT initiative in Ecuador, an effort to preserve a pristine rainforest, but also to reduce the carbon footprint around the world, and also to keep over 800 million barrels of oil underground so they're not polluting the atmosphere. My guest is someone who is an expert in this area. My guest today is Dr. Bisrat Aklilu. Dr. Aklilu has been the executive coordinator of the Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office of the United Nations Development Program since 2004. Dr. Aklilu, we're talking about this Yasuni ITT initiative, and you were talking about the role of your office, the United Nations Development Program. Let's talk a little bit about UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. I'm sure many of our viewers have heard of the Biosphere Program, but what exactly is this when you put a pristine natural resource into this program?
Well, in the case of us, similar to Yasuni, UNESCO looks at the dimension, the scope, the value of such an area for global well-being, and it has designated it as a World Biosphere Reserve because the benefits is not really only for Ecuador in terms of preserving it. That is why it feels that it's like a cultural heritage in some case. Here it's a biosphere reserve, and UNESCO designates this in similar to some of the other areas.
And there, of course, UNESCO has that Man in the Biosphere program, which is a very popular program where you can put pristine natural resources into them, such as the Everglades National Park in Florida,
right.
the U.S., Mammoth Cave
exactly.
in Kentucky, different ones like that. There are several hundred around the world.
Yes.
But one myth that's out there is that UNESCO controls those, but that simply is not true.
No,
UNESCO does not control it. You hear a lot of
not. In fact,
talk radio chatter, but that's not the,
in
the
this case. It is a totally Ecuadorian initiative.
Exactly, and that's the case in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, and elsewhere, right? But there are a lot of myths out there floating around. Well, we saw the first part of your very interesting video. Let's go to the second part, take a look at it, listen to it, and we'll come back and talk about it in just a moment.
Certainly.
Who is supporting the Yasuni ITT project? The Yasuni ITT Fund will receive donations from different sources, contributions of countries from all over the world, and international cooperation. Responsible corporations concerned with the future of mankind. Philanthropists worried about the possible consequences of climate change. Small donors and global citizens who would access our website. Initiative to change history. The petroleum stays there, underground, forever. Covered by this unique biodiversity, protected by the Tagaeri and Taromenane, by their ancestral rights. By nature's harmony. Yasuni ITT.
Well, Dr. Aklilu, that points out who's supporting and why it's important. As I understand, there are various countries such as Germany, Australia, Spain, as well as dignitaries, personalities such as Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Who are some of the other folks who are involved in supporting this, and what kind of support do they give to it?
Well, as we said at the beginning, the intention is really to raise at least half of the revenue foregone by the government of Ecuador, which is about 3.6 billion over 13 years. But what is really interesting is that the individuals, private citizens, have really kind of responded to this initiative incredibly. Of course, governments are also making contribution. Italy, for example, is now making a contribution of about 50 million, under a debt swap arrangement. Others like Spain, developing countries like Peru, like Chile, like Colombia are also making a contribution. And some private companies, individuals. What is most interesting is here in September last year during the General Assembly, there was an event held. And one individual that works in the financial sector here gave her annual salary to the Yasuni initiative. She was convinced that this is the right thing to do. And under the theme of that, we have also to contribute and to pay back.
Exactly. Now, are these initiatives, is this type of initiative very common around the world? I've heard of some of these swap arrangements like in Costa Rica and a few countries, but is this very prevalent worldwide?
Not as much as you'd think, but certainly it's gaining, I think, more and more popularity. Certainly, among the ones that we are handling, my office handles close to about some 50 different funds globally, operating in 82 countries. The Yasuni initiative is probably the unique one under this kind of arrangement, But quite possible that a number of countries now might resort to a debt swap arrangement to help when they agree with the development agenda that particular country is following.
So you think this could be a prototype for
Absolutely.
other countries, other areas, and other types of natural resources?
Absolutely. You know, even in Ecuador now, having seen what Italy has done, some countries now are exploring that possibility of really also making a contribution through these arrangements.
Well, I'm sure many people now are going to be going to your website to look for this, the mptf.undp.org, and they can also just Google Yasuni.
Yes, in fact, the easiest would be to simply yasunisupport.org.
That would work.
If you just yasunisupport.org, which allows also individual citizens to come in, to engage, to contribute, you know, in support of this particular, you know, historic initiative.
So they can go to yasunisupport.org, and
Precisely.
if people would like to contribute to this,
Anyone can
they can do that, and
Absolutely.
they'll certainly learn more about it.
Yes, absolutely. You know, you have a lot of information, both scientific as well as also general, including also this particular video. Part of it that we just showed is also there.
Well, we may not be able to mention any names, but do you have any other countries that are looking at this right now that may not want it public, but are considering the idea, maybe thinking this might be a good project to pursue or initiative to pursue?
Yes, I mean, in fact, there are quite a few countries, but they also see the responsibility on the part of the countries is quite onerous, you know, in terms of really saying that, you know, you've got to forego a huge resource that you have, because Ecuador is not asking 100% of the revenue that it's foregoing. It's saying half. It's going to take quite a lot of time. As you can see, you know, it started in 2010. The contribution has come, but not as much as expected. So I'm not really sure how many countries, despite the fact that they are fascinated, they really feel this is really a great initiative. I'm not really sure that they would necessarily try to do exactly the same.
Exactly. Now, of course, we see that almost every industry, especially in certain countries, I can speak of this country, for example, receives subsidies, tax breaks, different things like that. But do you think this type of initiative would help us move more quickly away from the dirty energy sources we have, such as coal, oil, different ones like that, into using alternative forms of energy, perhaps wind, solar, green forms of energy?
Yeah, you know, the country itself currently relies a lot on fossil fuel. And that's precisely, it wants to change its energy matrix. That's why it's saying that why don't we exploit our hydro, our energy, our solar, our biomass, precisely to have clean, renewable energy. And I think this is the move, certainly, that every country is trying to embark on, you know. So in that sense, yes, I think it's a model that I think, you know, most countries are trying. In fact, in the United Nations, there is a major initiative to have energy for all, by really moving towards renewable energy. So this initiative, I think, is globally is going to increase significantly in the years ahead.
Now, you also administer, I think you mentioned a minute ago, 50 other trust funds. Give us a little overview of a couple. We can't go through all 50 of them, but what are some of the, a couple of the major ones that you're involved with now?
I mean, if you look at humanitarian issues, for example, say in Somalia or Sudan, you know, quite often there is every year a request for funds to address humanitarian crisis, you know, ranging from food to water to health, you know. What this type of a fund does is it prepositions resource. It addresses the problem before it gets, you know, out of hand. And it enables the actors, whether it's the UN agencies, whether it's the non-governmental organizations, to immediately respond. And this has been extremely effective. This was what happened in Somalia during the famine last year. The fact that there was the Somali Common Humanitarian Fund that really made a major contribution to addressing this. In other areas, situation like Iraq, we have the Iraq, what we call the United Nations Development Group Iraq Trust Fund. After the 2003, you know, invasion and the crisis, Iraq, of course, you know, experienced huge devastation, and the whole infrastructure had to be built. The education, the health, the water sanitation facilities had to be restored. Again, a lot of countries came together, made a contribution to a common pool of fund that was administered by my office, partly also by the World Bank, and it enabled a whole range of implementing partners to address those issues. So the unique thing about this type of funds is that it's partners, it's countries, it's, you know, joining together and rallying, you know, behind a common program, so that instead of really having a fragmentation, duplication, and also not really necessarily achieving results. There are a number of these ones, and another one is the UN RED, the reduction of emission from avoiding deforestation. Again, a major initiative that's putting together a lot of countries to work together.
Right. Now, the RED stands for...
reduction of emission from deforestation, from avoiding deforestation and forest degradation, which is a major cause of carbon emission. About at least about 20% of the carbon emission is supposed to be coming from forest degradation, from deforestation.
Exactly. And it seems like the UN could play a unique role, does play a unique role in this area, because you're a neutral broker, and it would be difficult for a country, be it country A, B, or C, to control the funds going back into perhaps an Iraq or a Somalia or whatever it might be. So you are in a very unique position to be able to do this.
Exactly. I mean, I think, again, you pinpointed precisely that the issue. Here, not only do you have to have your neutrality and your objectivity, but you also have to have the system, the network, I mean, here you have got a lot of United Nations agencies working in these various countries. And instead of really doing it, individually, piecemeal, you better really come up with a holistic program where everybody rallies together, and in a very transparent manner, decision is made, what is the priority, what will be implemented.
Well, Dr. Bisrat Aklilu, the Yasuni initiative is very interesting, it's very important, and I'm sure that our viewers will Google it or go to your website to get more information. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.